Good morning, class. My name is Professor Wheeler, and this is my first time coming to you with a video lecture. I guess I should let you know that I've been teaching since 2003, so 21 years, but this is the first time I've taught an online class, so I hope you'll bear with me. I hope you enjoy the lecture materials and all the content I am placing in your portals for you to help you succeed in this course. Okay, well, let's dive into our first video lesson. And that is going to be the letter to the clergy from the clergy of the city of Birmingham to Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, Dr. King had come there to Birmingham. He was from Atlanta, Georgia, but he had come to Birmingham to help his affiliates who were members of an organization of which Dr. King was a founding member called the SCLC. That's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So chapters in Birmingham had asked Dr. King to come and help with their, with their march towards trying to achieve equal civil rights in this country. So let's take a look at that letter first, please. I'll give you a second to pull it up if you have not. Please have that at the ready. Okay. So the first thing I want you to notice about this letter is the signatures at the bottom. What do you see here? You see a variety of faith traditions, right? You see bishops, you see priests, you see pastors, you see preachers. Every major religious affiliate in Birmingham had come together to urge Dr. King to take his people and leave Birmingham, and also call off the civil rights protests that were going on there, peaceful protests. So let's take a look at the letter itself. The first thing that you will notice is that the clergy urged Dr. King to pursue his grievances in the court system. The second thing you will notice is that the clergy are blaming outside agitators for the problems in Birmingham. The third thing I want you to know is the commendations that these elite clergy are giving props to the cops. And if you've watched the videos that I've showed you, you will see that police officers were sicking attack dogs on peaceful protesters. They were jailing children. They were spraying fire hoses on teenagers that had peacefully assembled. So to claim that these protests were nonviolent is ridiculous. The violence was not on the behalf of Dr. King's people, but on the police they are so enthusiastic about. And the fourth thing, and probably the most important thing about this letter, is that the clergy are begging Dr. King to go home and to call off the local citizenry that are engaged in protests. Okay? Those are the charges to Dr. King. I want you to make careful note of those four charges that the clergy have made. Once again, they are, 1, that charges are best handled in the courts. Secondly, that outside agitators are causing all of these problems. Third is that the police are doing a bang-up job. And the fourth is that Dr. King needs to take all his people and go home and tell the protesters to knock it off. All right, let's take a moment and pull up Dr. King's letter and see how he responds to each of these charges. Okay. Hopefully you have either read and or watched Dr. King's entire letter. I'm not going to read it to you, but I am going to point out some things in various paragraphs that you need to be aware of. So let's start with the opener. he answers the first charge of the clergy's assertion that the protests are unwise and untimely. You will see that Dr. King, whenever he is refuting the clergy's charges, uses their own words, so they cannot claim that he was putting words in their mouth. They cannot claim, that they didn't know. All right. So let's look at that first paragraph a little closer. Notice how Dr. King mentions that he has secretaries and a busy office, and he couldn't possibly respond to all the charges and questions that come across his desk on a daily basis. Why is he doing this? He is doing this to establish his ethos. Now, you would think that the leaders in Birmingham would be well aware of Dr. King's ethos, and indeed they are. But because of the racism that was rampant in this country in the mid-20th century, and I'm afraid continues today, Dr. King had to establish himself as being on the same ethical footing as the other clergy who are asking him to do these things. The other thing that I want you to recognize is that Dr. King knows that being polite and to catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? So in his letter, he asserts that the clergy have come to him in an air of good faith and goodwill in making their requests to Dr. King. So in the first paragraph, we see him establishing his ethos. We see him becoming, getting them to be ready to hear his message. Because if he had come at them and said, look, you bunch of dicks, our people are doing what they need to do, and to hell with you, do you really think that the clergy would have read his letter at all? Probably not. But landing himself in their ethical group and being polite almost forces them to have to listen to him, does it not? Okay, so let's go on. He is answering their charges one by one. And he goes through great lengths to establish logos, logic, and ethos in the next several paragraphs as he talks about things such as, first, the people of Birmingham, those affiliates which I spoke of earlier that are in the SCLC, had asked him to come. So he didn't come just because he was a troublemaker or wanted to see what the action was for the day or the week or whatever. His affiliates had invited him there. The next thing I want to talk to you about is his appeal to the Apostle Paul. I want you to remember the audience that Dr. King is talking to the entire time you are reading this document. He's not talking to you, the student, although you are having to analyze his work. He's not speaking to the entire population of Birmingham or to the SCLC or to the corrupt governor of Alabama, Bull Connor. And if you want to see a real nasty person, I recommend highly that you Google videos about Bull Connor. Watch 3 or 4 minutes. You'll get the idea, okay? So anyway, Dr. King has established that he has been invited. The next thing he does is align himself with the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul was a disciple of Jesus Christ who, after Christ's death, made it his mission to evangelize Christ's message all over that ancient world. So when Paul leaves his hometown and goes to Tarsus, he is doing God's work, what God has called him to do, what God has called all clergy to do. So he's been invited, he is following God's work, and then he brings another charge or another reason for him to be there. He's an American. Do any of you need a passport to go to California, to New York, to Florida? No, you don't. Why? Because you're an American, and every state is your state. So Dr. King has dismissed these charges with solid supporting evidence that he has every right to be there. He's an American. He's a man of God, right? He's been invited there. So these charges of being asked to leave because he hasn't been invited, nonsense, he says. Okay. Let's see, where are we going from here? Okay. I love teaching this essay to students, especially new students and new writers, because it's so clear and easy to follow. Let's pick up on page 1, where Dr. King is going to lay out the process for which his affiliates are coming to the path of direct action. Okay, that first point is the collection of facts. That's what the organization has done. This isn't just applicable to Birmingham. This is applicable to any protest or direct action movement that might be necessary. So they gather the facts, right? And the facts are not great. We're going to go into them each one by one in a minute. So collection of facts. Then you have negotiation. Then you have self-purification. And then you have direct action. So for the next few pages, Dr. King is going to be addressing each one of these things. Now, the collection of facts isn't hard. Birmingham, the most segregated city in the country in 1963, had experienced bombings. The police brutality was well known. It was a violent, uncomfortable place to be for many people. But they had the facts in hand, and that led to the next step in the process, negotiation. The leaders of the SCLC did meet with members of the community, business owners, who agreed that in order for the SCLC and Dr. King to call off the violent protest, would agree to certain demands from the Black constituency. These demands included that racially insensitive, that's a nice word for what they were, racially insensitive signage be removed from locations, from businesses, from shops all over Birmingham. The business leaders agreed. The SCLC waited patiently for them to come down several weeks. None came down. If you negotiate in bad faith, that's really not a negotiation. Good faith negotiations mean that people agree to things and both parties follow through. The parties did not follow through, and appeals to have them comply fell on deaf ears. So, collection of facts, present. Negotiation, present, but not a good faith negotiation. Next comes self-purification. Now, maybe they could have chosen another word. Maybe that was self-toughening, or I don't know what. But they would practice taking blows to the face, being pummeled to see if they could resist fighting back, to teach them how to peacefully protest despite what was happening. But perhaps for me, and I'm a mother, so maybe this hits me hardest, but hundreds and hundreds of children were arrested to fill up the jail cells. Luckily, it was 1963, and while TV had not become ubiquitous or everywhere like it is now, enough news was getting out to the remaining United States and indeed all over the world. So, collection of facts, negotiation, self-purification, and finally, direct action. So Dr. King is saying, listen, none of this came about because of a whim. It's been carefully planned. And yet, still the people suffer. So let's go on to the remaining pages. Okay. Another thing that I want to point out to you that I should have said earlier, but hopefully you realize that Dr. King is in a jail cell alone with a pad and a piece of paper. He does not have his books available, his essays available, his advisors to fill him in on some things that he may have forgotten. But be aware of all the names that he drops throughout this letter and his reason for doing so. You'll see on page 2 that he mentions Socrates. He's an educated man, probably, most likely, more educated than many of the people who penned the original letter to Dr. King. I want you to go to the bottom of page 2. And there is a long section in that paragraph where Dr. King brings pathos into the argument. It's the section where he says, listen, our people have to sleep in uncomfortable cars when they travel because no one will let them rent a hotel room. He talks about the disrespect that men and women are routinely subjected to. Being called boy when you're a man, never having your wife addressed with a proper name like Mrs. And then the most impactful to me of all is Dr. King talking to his little daughter, Coretta, when she is 6 years old, and she can't go to the amusement park that's been advertised on TV. And Dr. King says, yeah, that's sad, but what's worse for his daughter and his son is the unconscious disdain and anger that his children are going to grow up with because of the actions of white people. Not all of whom are bad, but many who are. And how dare the clergy come to him with anything but Christ-like love. All right, let's go on. I really wish you guys were in my face-to-face class because there's so much more I could say. But I'm trying to give you the tools that you need to succeed in this course. So let's talk a little bit more about Pathos. He moves from the general, the love of his people and the injustices they suffer, men and women who he both knows and does not know that have been subjected to the name calling, and then moves into the personal, to his own children. Remember, pathos is passion, ethos is ethics, logos is logic. Okay, let's move on. On page 3, he talks about just and unjust laws. A just law is one that aligns with God's law. An unjust law is one that does not align with God's law. Why is he talking about God's law and human law in this section? Again, remember his audience. His audience are fellow clergy, and they know very well the Bible verse that says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." He is reminding them of their faith oath here and doing it very well. Okay, moving on. Sorry, I have to glance at my paper every once in a while. This is a long lecture. Okay, I would like for you to skip to the middle of page 4, where it says, "You spoke of our activity in Birmingham as extreme." He warns that oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. He is telling Birmingham faith leaders and others that if nonviolent protest does not work, if direct action does not succeed, then other movements like Elijah Muhammad's Black Muslim movement will make sure that things do change, and that will make certain that blood is running in the streets. Dr. King says this isn't a threat. This is a historical reality. So again, think about logos in this instance. He is appealing to their sense of logic. This has happened throughout history, a word I detest. But here, a phrase I detest, I should say, but here it's true. Oppressed people will not remain oppressed forever, yet people who have power almost never give it up without it being forcibly taken from them. Think about that. Okay. We're going to go on to the end of the letter, but again, you are responsible for everything that's in it. So if you have questions about a part I didn't cover or a part I did cover, you need to ask me. Okay. All right. So let's look at the closing. Once again, he is taking on, what is the term? He is taking on the tradition of closing long letters with a reminder that he is coming to them in good faith as one of them. Again, he's restating his thesis, correct? And he is closing on that note of goodwill. I hope this has helped. Please contact me if you have any other questions, and I'm happy to answer them. Please remember that my office hours are Monday and Tuesday from 11 to noon, and I am also available on Microsoft Teams Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 4:30 to 5:30. Please give me a heads up if you're going to attend virtually. I admit that I spaced a couple of times last week because I got busy, but if you let me know that you need me there, I will absolutely be there. Also, you're welcome to come visit me on campus. I forgot to tell you my office number, but it's A246 Monday and Tuesday from 11 to noon. Thanks a lot, y'all. Happy reading.